When crossing a culture and your church is not going to be there day after day, use a development process that will be sustainable and reproducible. And so I want to look at 5 different things that will help you do that. It's to start building the foundation, then teach local believers, equip local trainers, provide resources as necessary, and then step away. Now, let me just pause for a moment before I go into each one and talk about step away. The thing about mission is that as we step into a community to be involved, there are always times where we need to eventually step away. So you want to build that into the very beginning, whether it's people that you're partnered with or people that you're helping or training, is to let them know that we're trying to build you up so that you don't need us anymore. We want to maintain a relationship with you, but we can't always be here to take the leadership of this, to be the ones who are doing things. So build that in at the beginning. And so that's why it's important to keep in mind that step before you get started. So let's go back to the beginning. Start building the foundation. It's important, again, to start with the most important thing, which is build a prayer base, build a prayer movement. That before you start, you're building on the foundation of prayer, that you're trusting God for what's going to come out of that. And then you go into the community and you start building relationships, and you're looking for persons of peace. Who is out there that's going to help you, that's going to open doors, that's going to welcome you and say, here's where you can start, here's how we can help you. And you want to look for persons of peace. And then you start to cast the vision, whether it's with other churches, whether it's with leaders in the community, whether it's even people who you're going to be helping. What's the vision? That you're not here to rescue them, you're here to come alongside of them and help them grow from where they are now to something far better where they can be. And then you want to begin to assess what's happening in the community. What are the things that are already being done? What are the things that others are doing? And part of that assessment then are where are the gaps? What's not being done? Where are the needs? Who are the people who've been left behind? And then you look for unchurched communities nearby, because we always care about those who don't have the gospel available, don't have a church available. Are there peoples, are there places in your area that don't have the gospel being provided, that don't have a church available for those people? That's building the foundation. And that's what you have to build first. So oftentimes when we go into a community, whether it's our own community or a community in another location, and our members want to just get started doing something right away, and we need to slow them down sometimes and say, you know what? Let's build a strong foundation. Let's make sure this is in place before we go to the next level. So what is next is we're looking for people that can come along and learn what we have to teach. Oftentimes people are saying, well, we'll go and do it for people, rather than let's help them do it for themselves. Whether it's local believers or people in the local community, start teaching others so they can do it for themselves. And take that for as far as you can, for as long as you can. But you also don't want to get stuck always having to be the one who are the trainers. So the next thing you do is equip local trainers. Who is in the community that can become the trainers? And so oftentimes we think, well, when you're working among the poor, you're working with people who are HIV positive, you're working among people who are helping orphans, that we have to always be the ones going in to help. We have to be the ones always going in to train, but we don't. The people in those communities that are in those affected people can become the trainers themselves. And they can become trainers actually quite quickly. If you see that there are people in the community doing what they've been trained to do, they can turn around and train others right away if they're encouraged to. Too often we say, well, they can't be a trainer until they've learned everything. Well, often when they're waiting to learn everything, they never become a trainer. They never start to multiply. When in fact, if they've learned one thing, they can start passing that on. And you just have to be one step ahead of them. And you can teach them. I know you've only learned one thing, but you can teach the one thing. And when you learn the second thing, you can teach the second thing. And when you learn the third, teach that. And that's how you begin to develop local trainers. Next is provide resources as necessary. Why do we wait until this point to talk about resources? Well, first of all, it's important to wait on resources because we're trying to build relationships. So if you introduce resources too soon, oftentimes you'll short circuit the ability to teach local believers what they can do for themselves. And if they're not learning to do it for themselves, they can't become trainers of others. If they think it takes resources to do it or resources to train others, it's not going to happen beyond the few people we help. So this is the first time we actually start talking about resources in the community. And we say it's as needed. I've seen a situation where in the beginning they kept saying, bring us resources, bring us resources. And we said, well, let us get through this process first. And by the time we got to this point in the process, and we said, are you ready to talk about resources now? The concern was, well, if you start bringing resources now, what's it going to do to our people who are already doing it for themselves? What's it going to do for those who become our trainers? Maybe we should just wait on the resources for a while. And that's a beautiful thing to see, that they're not just waiting for somebody to come out and give them something. But it is a point where at times you want to talk about, well, what would be necessary? So I want to talk about for just a moment, what kinds of resources might be necessary. First of all, one of the best ways to use resources is to accelerate. Accelerate. Our resources needed to move it beyond the few to more. For example, it might be that you're limited by your ability to help people in a local community, and to get this out to another community is going to take some resources to get people out to that location and do the training. So accelerate. Another is the ability to build capacity. What helps people to build capacity? In other words, they're doing about 50% of what they can do with what they have, but another 50% might help them take it all the way there. And I've seen this oftentimes in training where they'll get started, they'll get doing it, and they're almost there, but it's just going to take a few more resources to get them all the way there. And so capacity building. And then finally, there's the ability to capitalize. So for example, in churches might get planted and they're doing great. They've started with no resources, but they keep growing, but they don't quite have the resources to get into a building where they can grow even more. Well, the thing that you know about capitalizing is that when you put the original resources in to help them, they're not going to need more resources to continue that they will grow, and they'll be able to provide for the maintenance and the ongoing care of that thing that you've given them capital for. So that's some ways to use resources. What you don't want to do is give resources that they turn around and say, now to keep it going, we need more resources. To maintain it, we need more resources. Or they've run out of money. They're thinking that the school will be paid for by students, or the hospital will be taken care of by people doing user fees. And they find out over time that those resources weren't enough to keep doing that. And if they're going to try to help those without medical care or those that can't get an education, that they have to stop serving the poor so they can only serve the rich. And they'll be the ones who provide the resources to keep it going. So you have to think through these things and plan these things accordingly in the community before you just bring resources out and do something. And then, of course, we get to that terrible part that we all think about, which is step away. It's just so hard to think about stepping away from people that you love and care about. But ultimately, you're trying to help them grow up to be independent from you, that they don't need you to be there. They still want you to be there. We still want to be in relationship with them. But it's time for you to let them take over, make sure they're fully leading, making sure that they're training, and they can multiply themselves. So these 5 different ways, this process of development is very important as you get into a community. So I want you to take some time and actually think through a piecework that you're going to do in a community and talk about, how do you start building the foundation? And then what would teaching local believers look like? And what would it look like to then begin to ask them to be the trainers, where you can equip them to be the trainers? And then what resources might be needed, and which ones should we be careful of not introducing too soon? And then finally, what does step away look like? So take some time discussing that. And thank you for taking time to do this workshop on the process of development.